So you're trying to get your mix to sit at minus 14 LUFS, but you're having problems. Let me tell you how to do it if you want to, why you might not want to, and what to do instead. I'm Keith from No Label, No Producer, No Limits.com. Let's dive right in. Spotify has famously said that they play back their music at about minus 14 LUFS. Now, I see people in the audio forums take that as advice for what level they should shoot for when mixing, which isn't true, and we'll talk about that later. LUFS stands for Loudness Units Full Scale, and it's an attempt to measure how loud something seems to the human ear. Now, it measures loudness over a period of time, and it measures the average of that loudness, which means you could have one song that varies in level from here to here, its average would be here, and another song that varies in level from here to here, and its average would also be here. They could have the same LUFS values, even though they're wildly different. And these differences in dynamic range can be the root of the problem of people trying to master to minus 14 LUFS. When they try to render to minus 14 LUFS, they run into problems. My DAW, for instance, Reaper, has the ability to render to a specific LUFS target. And what happens is they say, I render to minus 14 and I got peaks all over the place. What's wrong with this DAW? The DAW sucks. Well, that's not where the problem is. The problem is in between the chair and the computer monitor. So what do we need to do? We need to control our dynamic range. Let me explain. Imagine this idiot represents the dynamic range of a piece of music. His bulbous head represents the loudest parts and his feet the quietest. The average level would be right around his crotch. So remember, his crotch is average. Now let's get our track to minus 14 LUFS. But remember, we don't want to go above 0 dB true peak, because that would mean distortion. So we go to our fancy DAW and we normalize to minus 14. Now remember, LUFS is a measurement of average loudness, so it's going to take the average represented by the crotch and turn it up until it's equal to the line. But look at what happens to his head. He has no headroom. His head is in no man's land where there's ugly digital distortion. So how do we fix that? Well, as a general rule, we fix it with compression. Compression lessens the difference between the loudest and the quietest parts of your material. So now, once we've squeezed the dynamic range a little bit, we can normalize to minus 14 LUFS, and we don't peak. So we need to control our dynamic range with compression. And that's fine in theory, but how do we do it in practice? Well, here's how I do it. I often compress individual instruments. So if I have a bunch of guitar tracks, I might compress each one or several of those guitar tracks. Those guitar tracks feed into a bus. I compress that bus a little bit. And there are buses for drums and vocals as well. Those get compressed as well. So that's 2 stages of compression. Then those buses sum at a master. The master gets compression, and then at a final stage, the last thing the signal hits before becoming the final mix, is a limiter, which chops off any peaks above a certain level. So it's multiple stages of compression, small amounts at various phases. And if you do that, that will tighten up your dynamic range, and you'll be able to normalize to whatever value you're looking for. However, I don't normalize to a particular value. So what do I do instead of shooting for a particular LUFS level? I shoot for a range, generally somewhere from minus 16 to minus 9 LUFS. It can vary a little bit depending on the genre. And what I'm looking for is a good sound. I want it to sound tight and punchy, which compression helps with, but I don't want it to sound squished or thin, which too much compression can cause. Now, why do I take this attitude? Well, it's because the level that you send to Spotify, for the most part, doesn't matter. If you send a mix into Spotify at minus 11 LUFS, they're just going to turn it down to minus 14 LUFS. And you hear people in the audio forum saying, Oh, you don't want Spotify to turn down your mix. Well, why not? If they turn it down to minus 14, it's just going to sound the same as its neighboring songs that are also at minus 14. It's a non-destructive process. It's not limiting or compression. They just turn it down. It's okay if you send in a mix that's louder than that. Now, the same is not quite true in terms of sending a mix that's too quiet into Spotify or other similar services. As a general rule, they will try to turn it up. They'll try to make your minus 20 LUFS song louder. But what might happen is they might experience peaks then. And in that case, they either have to not turn your song up as loud or they have to limit the top. So if you don't want Spotify to make decisions about limiting your song, send them a song with a nice, tight dynamic range. I think minus 15, minus 16 is okay, but generally I shoot for something a little bit higher than minus 14. But the idea here is to get the song to sound good. Why do some songs sound quieter or louder on Spotify? Well, the chief factor is probably spectral balance. And that's because certain frequencies sound louder than other frequencies. If you don't have enough energy in the upper mid-range frequencies, the song's not going to sound as loud as other songs that do have that energy. So if you find your mixes aren't translating well to places like Spotify, look at the spectral balance. Look at tightening your dynamic range. Well, if you're mastering an album project, that's a little different. You want the songs to flow naturally from one to the other without any significant changes in volume, usually, unless it's a quieter song, of course. So you can use LUFS in this case to judge where you are in relation to other songs. I mostly use my ears, but having another tool is good. There's a link down below to an article that contains more information about this subject. And as always, if you found this information valuable, like, subscribe, share, comment. Until next time, I'm Keith from No Label, No Producer, NoLimits.com. See you soon.